Hello, Lisa Marie Kosas from Global One Health. Today's video, I'm going to talk about posture. Outside of breathing, I would say posture is probably the second most important topic that we can discuss. In a society that we live in today, majority of people, especially all of my client base, spends a significant amount of time throughout their day sitting at their desk in front of one, if not multiple monitors. How you sit directly and dramatically affects how you feel, not just physically in your body, but the slouching affects our breathing, our ability to activate our core, joint structures, our flexibility, a lot of important things. So I think I deem it very important to address this subject. So posture, what is posture? Posture is basically the skeletal position that we assume throughout our day. If we're sitting, are we sitting slouched? Are we sitting up straight? Standing posture, am I standing equally weighted on two legs? Am I standing on one leg? Or do I holding a baby, a bag? So posture is the skeletal positioning that our body is in. We're going to talk about sitting first, but I will address standing postural positions. But why is posture important? So how does poor posture affect our bodies? I would say that the biggest request or goal that most of my clients have when they first come to see me, one of those things is I need better posture. I need to sit up straight. I'm slouching at my desk. It's important because posture or poor posture has negative effects on our body. First things, if I'm slouching, I can't properly activate my core structure because I am in a slouched position. So poor posture negatively affects our ability or impedes our ability to properly activate our core. Two, in doing so, it also inhibits our ability to diaphragmatically breathe, which is what I talked about, the importance of learning how to activate the diaphragm for proper breathing. If I'm slouching, I cannot properly activate that diaphragm, so therefore I'm not going to have good quality diaphragmatic breath. So poor posture also negatively impacts our ability to breathe correctly and efficiently. Three, when I slouch from a side view, I'm going to affect the quality of my joint structures for sure in my spinal joints from top to bottom, right, neck to tailbone, right? But I'm also going to affect the joint structures of my hips. And if my shoulders are rounding forward, I'm also negatively affecting the ability to have good shoulder mobility, perhaps, from slouching. And another aspect of negative aspect of poor posture is that it's going to affect the muscle tissue, the soft tissue. So if I'm slouching, I can guarantee that the muscles in the front of my trunk and spine have become shorter and become a little bit lax, and they can't properly engage. The muscles of my back are going to become elongated and inhibited and are also not properly engaging. So there's a lot of things we want to think about, but those are just some basic negative effects of poor posture. So, poor posture versus good posture. Well, how do I know how to sit? So, let's give you some basic landmarks, some bony assessment, reference points that you can think about. So, the easiest thing is thinking about your sit bones, right? So, I referenced those, why I think it's important to know what your pelvic floor is, right? I talked about that pelvic floor diamond, referencing that one more time. 2 of the 4 points of your pelvic floor are your sit bones, the side points of the diamond, but your right and left sit bone are your sit bones, right? Your bony landmarks in the booty cheeks. Now, if you're sitting on a very cushioned chair, it's a little bit harder to feel the sit bones. So always good, find a little bit of a harder surface to sit on, like a bench or something. This is where you can get in a good idea. I know in some yoga classes, they have you sit with your, because there you're in a hard studio floor, they have you sit with your palms up. So if you're not sure where your sit bones are, this is a very good little drill to do. Sit on your hands, palms up, and then you can feel the booty bones in your butt. Now, if you slouch, you're going to notice that the sit bones kind of shift forward in space, which means you've kind of collapsed and you're now sitting behind the sit bones, not directly on top. So think when you're pitching a tent, you want to put those stakes vertically in the ground. You want to be vertically stacked on top of your sit bones. So if I'm slouched, I now can feel in behind them. If I slowly start to sit up straight, I can start to feel that I'm directly or sitting directly on top of them. So that is a good quick, easy reference to know, am I slouching or not? So we've now established the sit bones as the base of support for that seated postural position. So now I want to sit up straight. I want to think about vertically stacking my shoulders over my hips. I don't want to be here. Some people say, well, I lean back in my chair. Sometimes I have my feet in my desk. You don't really want to do any of these things, especially spend an extended period of time in those positions. So we want to think about stacking shoulders directly over hips. However, leaning forward, some clients say, oh, I'm sitting up straight, but I'm just a little bit ahead. Well, now I'm unevenly or asymmetrically loading the musculature in my trunk, right? So if I lean forward, I'm going to feel a lot more tension in my back muscles, my spinal erectors. If I'm leaning back, and actively engaging my core, I'll engage the front of my abs wall, but most people are not sitting up in that position. So again, trying to find, I chose black shirt so you can see nicely in the chair, right? So I want to have a little bit of an arch in my lumbar spine. And if I look straight ahead for me, you're going to notice my cervical spine, which is my neck, curves slightly forward, as does my lumbar spine curving slightly forward. In between those two spinal sections is my thoracic spine, represented by my rib cage, and that slightly curves a little bit back. So there is a natural, what we call S-curve in our spine. We want to make sure we keep the natural anatomical curves of those structures of the spine present, ideally, as much as we can throughout our workday or throughout the time that we are sitting. So I'm sitting on my sit bones, my shoulders are stacked over my hips, I'm maintaining the natural curves of my spine, and ideally I want my head to be centered and balanced over that cervical spine. Now we all know we look at our phone or our keyboard and we start doing this. I notice a tremendous amount of the time, 90+%, that's a huge number, huge statistic. The moment my client's eye level starts to drop, within seconds, I will start to see their head fall, their chin level lower, and now all of a sudden, their head is going forward. Now their neck muscles are being pulled on. It's affecting what's happening in the neck muscle structure, the upper traps, right? Big culprit for stressing, holding stress, tensing the shoulders, shoulder joints coming up. The moment my head starts to go forward, the likelihood of my shoulders moving in the forward direction with it now becomes more exaggerated, and now my spine is going to start to collapse more. And as human beings, we have a natural innate structure of equilibrium, right? A balanced structure. So we know that we're supposed to be upright as human beings. It's instinctive in our bodies. So as my head starts to go forward, it's going to almost naturally induce a rounding or flexing of my spine. So then I start to assume this postural position, right? Before you know it, we're there. We've been there for hours. And think about it. I see clients on average 2 times a week. If I see you 2 hours a week, that is less than 2% of your entire life in 1 week, 7 days, 24 hours a day. So whatever I give you or exercise I give you to strengthen your body, to help strengthen the core structure, strengthen your back muscles, to help you have good posture, I can't undo in 2 hours a week what, if you're sitting like this 8, 9 hours a day, 5 days a week minimum, it's a numbers game. It's just not possible, right? So you have to start thinking about how to sit up straight, how to have good posture throughout your day, every day. Now, you're going to think of it 24/7. No, that's not realistic. Which is why I suggest to my clients, please give yourself reminders, whether it's setting something on your cell phone as a little quick reminder. Oh, the bell went off, sit up straight. Now, you may only stay there for a few seconds, maybe a minute or two, and maybe you'll start to slouch again. But the key is, how do I correct poor posture, is a question I want to address. Self-awareness. The more that you are actually aware that you're slouching, that's step 1. You have to be aware. Step 2, and they have to go hand in hand. Step 2 needs to be the moment that you catch yourself slouching, you must self-correct, right? So that is the second point that I address, and how do I address poor posture? I need to be aware that I'm sitting poorly, and at that moment, self-recognition is critically important. If I actually correct myself, I am training what we refer to as muscle memory. I'm sure you all have heard of it, right? you do a movement pattern over and over again, the muscles start to remember that pattern. And whether that pattern is a movement pattern or it's a static postural position that I'm assuming throughout my day, my muscles, if I spend most of my time here, this is what they think is natural or is neutral spine. This is what they remember. But if I actively, consciously train or recorrect, I should say, my body to be in a better postural positioning, in good posture, I am training my muscles to now think, right? That's muscle memory, involves brain. And I mentioned in one of my other videos about the foot core sequencing, that if you want the brain consciously thinking about what you're doing when you're moving. So if we can just increase the amount of times per day that our brain self-corrects our posture if it's poor, we are retraining those muscles to start to work differently in a more positive way to support good posture. So number one, we need to be aware that we are sitting poorly. And number two, we need to self-correct as soon as possible and as often as possible. So now getting back to that seated postural positioning, to review, we want to be sitting on our sit bones directly, shoulders aligned over hips. I talked about the natural curves of the spine. Now, if I have more than one monitor, I had a client that was, had multiple monitors and she was kind of, always facing this way and then doing this. So I'm sitting in an asymmetrical position in a rotation. That's going to affect your ability to rotate from side to side. So if you have more than one monitor, I suggest, turn your body, right? I mean, it's okay to turn your head, but if you're spending hours like this and then this, you're creating another asymmetry in the body, which can have its own other negative effects. So try to be mindful, change your body position to face your monitor. Now, setup of your workstation can make or break postural positioning. So, say for example, and I've given this this assessment drill to many of my clients early on in teaching. And I asked them this. I said, I want you to go to your office and close and sit in your desk and look at your monitor and notice, but set yourself up so that your eye level is directly in line with the center of your monitor, because that's pretty much where your focus is, correct? So if I'm looking at my monitor, but my monitor is here, the likelihood that without me even realizing, unconsciously, my eyes are focusing on what I'm seeing in my monitor. If it's the center of the monitor or the main level of the position of the monitor is here, my eyes are going to go to there, which is probably going to cause my head to drop forward, which now my body is going to lower itself instinctively to get to that level. So the interesting thing is when I send clients after that session, I talk about posture, back to the office, I said, I want you to do this drill. Sit at the desk, notice when you're looking straight at the center, does it make you want to slouch or do you notice that you are slouching? Two, I then want you to close your eyes because I also teach them how to find neutral posture, which I'm talking about now, right? So then I want you to close your eyes, find your sit bones, sit up on them directly. Think about sitting up tall, lengthening your spine. You're going to feel your core muscles engage just a little bit more. And then keep that long position and then open your eyes. And if your eyes are not at the center of your monitor, but they're much higher above, then you need to change the position of your work setup. How you're positioned at work is going to dictate your posture, which is going to affect all those other things I talked about at the beginning of the video. So you have to set yourself up for success. So sit up straight, know where your eye level on your horizon is with the chin as if it's resting on a shelf. If the monitor is not in front of the eye level, do whatever you can to change that. Raise the level of the monitor up. If you have adjustable chairs, a lot of my clients have these ergonomic setups, right? So the chair should be able to adjust. So if you need to raise your monitor, change the level of your seat, anything that you need to do to possibly make your postural position at work as ideal as possible. The longer time you spend in a slouched position, the harder the habit is to break. And some people have spent decades sitting in poor posture. That's a lot of work to undo. So we talked about how poor posture negatively affects the ability to activate our core. It inhibits our diaphragm. It affects, right, I'm putting much more load in the discs of my lower back. Some people have upper back pain or lower back pain. When I slouch, I'm putting extra load in that lumbar spine, and my core is now shortened in the front and lengthened in the back. My spinal erectors are lengthened. They can't support the joint structures. It also affects my ability to move in my hip joint, right? You are inhibiting and decreasing your ability to have good range of motion in your hips, also from poor posture. And many clients develop a forward shoulder. Why is that critically important? And I address this, and I think it's worth mentioning. The more my shoulders collapse forward, it over time is going to inhibit my ability to raise my arms up overhead. So a lot of times I look at clients, I assess in their early first session, I'm looking at what is their ability just to simply move their arms up and down at their shoulder joint, assessing joint mobility or range of motion. And they get to here and they stop. And I said, okay, arms overhead. Oh, okay. So then they can't get their arm up at their shoulder because there's a restriction now in the joint from spending excessive amount of time in this position, shoulders forward, internally rotated, right? That's going to affect my ability one day to be able to get my arm up to vertical. Then they start moving from their back because they don't have the range of the shoulder joint. So please understand, I think this is so critically important, that the amount of time you spend in poor posture and how you sit will affect so many things in a negative way if it's poor postural alignment. So I talked about why poor posture is bad, the effects it has on the body. I talked about what proper sitting posture is, how to find it. I addressed how to set up your workstation. But let's just, before I finish, talk about standing posture and what that is. So when I look at a client from a side view, right, most of the time people tend to, and I danced for many years, so I think I naturally gravitated in a forward pelvic position. Most clients tend to be more forward to the balls of their feet than too far back, although I do see it. I find this more common, right? So, and I have these pants on so you can see the stripe down the center of my leg, right? So what is ideal standing posture? I want to teach it. That's what these videos are for, to provide detailed instructional cues and food for thought, and you have it as a reference point so you can always go back and finally learn and get in your mind what the important things I'm trying to cover in each of these videos. That's why my videos are very detailed. I teach very detailed, and I think it's important to have the knowledge and the information and just put it in the back burner, in the back of your mind, so that at any point in time you can draw upon it, and the videos are here for instructional reference. So look down at my ankle bone. Ideal standing posture from a lateral side view is I want to be in a straight line. If my pelvis is forward over the balls of my feet, I am not centered in my standing position. So I want, if I hold here the front of my hip and the back of my glute, the middle or center of the side of my hip should be directly over the lateral center part of my knee joint. And if I continue going straight down, those two joint structures should be lined up with the lateral ankle bone, not forward, not back of it. Now, a drill I give my clients is to shift back and forth so that they can learn how to find center. Because remember, the more time you spend in a position, your body thinks that is natural, but that may not be ideal neutral. There's a very big difference. So we want to train ideal neutral, which may not feel natural because our body's not used to it. So I give my clients the drill: shift your weight from the balls of your feet all the way to your heels. Just nice and slow, rock back and forth. You'll feel slight changes in the musculature of your pelvic floor, your glutes perhaps, your leg muscles, your lower leg, upper and lower leg muscles, how your feet feel, right? So if I'm perfectly stacked, ideal position, the center of the hip directly over the center of the lateral knee and over the lateral ankle bone, okay? That's going to enable the pelvic floor to engage more properly. Now, if I continue up the chain of that side view, the center of my shoulder joint should also be directly in line with those three joint structures of the lower extremity. And lastly, my head, most people's head is here. My head position, the ear must be directly lined up over the shoulder. And that's one of the hardest ones to get clients to do. So if you spend a lot of time like this, you need to practice what we call retraction, a pulling back to retract. I'm taking away what I'm saying, a retraction of my skull so that my ear can line up over my shoulder. And finally, a frontal view of posture. So a lot of people I notice, it's very common to stand on one hip. So I want you to do that for a second, and I want you to put your hands on the sides of your hips and notice how just by shifting your weight from side to side, what it feels like, and if you've never thought of it, it's very interesting to me, what it feels like and how the muscle activation changes, right? So if I shift all the way to this side, I'm going to feel the lateral muscles on this side engaging tightly, and this side kind of goes a little bit weaker, right? And then if you shift back and forth, you'll feel a little bit of that muscle activation change. Ideally, you want to be, we have two legs, we are bipedal beings, you want to be equally stacked, hips over ankles, equal weight between two legs. Now, what is proper width? Well, women tend to, especially when sitting, I've noticed a lot of my female clients tend to sit more like this. A lot of my male clients will sit with the legs collapsed open, ankles kind of collapsed. It's just what I've noticed over the years of teaching to be a very common trend. Now, when I do that, I'm also, even though I'm not weight bearing, I am training the ankles to collapse out. So I see a lot of my clients where they kind of roll out to the outsides of their feet. Not ideal, right? We want the weight to be equally distributed throughout the structures. So I want my ankles technically to be directly the same vertical alignment we talked about in the lateral view. We want from a forward-facing position. So when we talk about hip width apart, it is not the width of our hips on the sides of our hips. Hip width apart refers to the center of the joint socket. This is my thigh bone, my femur. The head of my femur bone is in the middle of my socket, give or take approximately, right? Some people a little bit wider, a little bit more narrow, but generally speaking, the heads of the femurs, the heads of the thigh bones, those femoral heads sit in the center of the socket. That is hip width apart. So the position of the width of your feet is very important, because if you're not standing with your feet / ankles directly under your hip joint and lower back, sacrum, are not being properly and fully supported by your leg bones. Bones, think of them as the steel beams that support the structure of the building, the foundation of the structure of the building. If they're not perfectly lined up, the building could have a shaky foundation, right? So your legs are your base of support to support body weight in a vertical position. And if the ankles are not directly stacked under the hips, you're not getting the maximum support for efficient postural positioning standing. So you want the center of the hips straight line down, right of the middle of my kneecap should be directly under the center of my hip. If I continue going down, if you can look at my ankles, the center of my ankle joint should be under the middle of my kneecap, which should be about in line with my second, third toe. And hence I'm stacked up vertically from there. So a little bit of a lengthy video, but I think all of the information is extremely important. I talk about all of this in my posture blogs. I put it in that blog, specific blog, in 4 parts. You can write a book on posture, but I wanted to cover as much of the information I find pertinent so that clients have this information and this knowledge that they can just put in their mind and think about whenever possible. The more you think about it and the more you correct, the more you can improve your posture, which will affect positively. Good posture will affect, right, my ability to activate my core, have a stronger trunk and midsection, be able to breathe more efficiently, get more oxygen into the body, have better joint structure, less back pain. There's so many things that we can talk about why good posture is helpful, right? So I wanted to cover poor posture, good posture, how to sit, how to stand. I think I covered all the gamut. Again, Global One Health, Global One Fitness, those are both my access to my website. Access that for reference. All the information I talked about in the video is in my blog. But I know a lot of clients have said, let's have some instructional videos so we can actually see as if I'm teaching you. So please be aware of your posture. You will only feel better because of it. Thanks so much.